Hello, today I want to show you how to make these beaded earrings with a looped fringe at the bottom. I like that the pattern is a little mismatched on each side, and it's also a really basic color scheme, so it will go with a lot of outfits, which I also enjoy about this pattern. Let's take a look at the supplies we're going to need. I am using Miyuki Delica seed beads in a size 11 in three colors. I have a black, a cream, and a gold color. You can find the exact colors on the pattern sheet. I have a lever back earring wire. I have wire guards, which are also sometimes called thread guards. And I have a size 12 beading needle. I have nylon beading thread for the fringe part of the earring. And then for the top part of the earring, I'm using Fireline and a 6-pound weight. Additionally, I have a beading pattern, and you could download this pattern from my Etsy site or my website. If you don't have a pattern, don't worry, you can still learn a lot from this video. So to begin, you're going to want to cut 4 to 5 feet of your Fireline beading thread and thread your needle. Next, you're going to pick up 2 beads, the first 2 beads in your pattern, on the bottom row of your pattern, and slide those beads down towards the end of your thread, leaving a 3 to 4 inch tail. Then loop your thread around and come back up through the first bead like so. You're going to loop that around, and you want the beads to be sitting next to each other. Here, this one, I'm just going to fiddle with it a bit and just make it sit where it's supposed to, which could be, there we go, that's the way it's supposed to look. And then you bring your needle down through the second bead, and then back through the first bead. We're just looping around these beads. And because they're the first 2 beads in the row, we loop around them twice. So now I'm just going to come back down through that second bead again, and then we're ready to add the rest of the row. There we go. And now I pick up my next bead, and I bring my needle around through the second bead in the row, and I pull that tight. And now I bring my needle back through the third bead in the row, and I pull that tight. And now I'm going to pick up my fourth bead, bring my needle down through the third bead, and pull that. And we're building a little row now, like a ladder. And then we come back up through the fourth bead and pull tight. Now we pick up the fifth bead and bring your needle through the fourth bead. Pull that tight, and now we're going to come back down through the fifth bead to secure it. Just like so. And now we're going to pick up a sixth bead and come down through the fifth bead. And basically, you will carry on through the rest of this row in the same way, adding 1 bead at a time, building your ladder until you get to the end of the row. In this particular pattern, it is 25 beads until the end of the row. So carry on until you get there, and join me back here when you have completed your first row. Okay, so here we are. I've completed my first row of ladder stitch, and now I'm going to add on my first row of brick stitch. So if you take a look at your ladder stitch row, you'll see there are little thread connectors in between each bead. We're going to call these thread bridges, and those thread bridges are how we're going to build the row of brick stitch. So I'm going to pick up my first 2 beads of the next row, I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to slide it under the second thread bridge from the outside edge of my row of ladder stitch, and I pull that through. Okay, and now I'm going to take my needle and I come up through the second bead that I've added to that row. And they look a little wonky, so what we do is we come down through the first bead. This is how we get them to sit nicely. And then we're going to come back up through the second bead. And with this stitch, they will both sit where they're supposed to, and you'll be ready to carry on with the rest of the row. So we pull that tightly, and now that's how they should look. Lined up like little bricks. And then we pick up the next bead, and from here on out we just add one bead at a time. So we pick up one bead, we go under the next thread bridge, pull that through, and then we come up through that bead like so. And there we go. And now we're going to add another bead. I'm following my pattern here. So I'm going to come underneath the next thread bridge with this white bead. Pull that through. And then come back up through that same bead. And this is how you build your row of brick stitch, one bead at a time. It's only the first two beads of that row that you add two at a time. So I picked up another one. I'm going underneath the next thread bridge. Got a bit of a knot there. You want to move slowly so you don't end up with knots. And then I come back up through this bead. Now I continue the rest of the row in this manner, adding one bead at a time, sliding under the thread bridge, back up through the same bead. When you get to the end of that row, meet me back here, and then I'm going to show you one more time how to start a row of brick stitch. Here we go. So because this is the trickiest part of brick stitch, I just wanted to show you one more time how to start a row. So I finished my first row, and now I'm ready to start my next row of brick stitch. I've picked up two beads. I'm coming underneath the second thread bridge with my two beads, and then I bring my needle up through the second bead, pull that tight, and then down through the first bead, and then up through the second bead again. There we go. And now for the rest of the row, you're just going to add one bead at a time, just as you did in the last row. And keep building your rows back and forth. When you get to the end of each row, you're going to work back in the opposite direction. You may want to flip your work around so that you're constantly holding it in the same hand. And you just keep working back and forth like that until you get to a place where you need to change a thread. Then meet me back here and I will show you how to change a thread. Okay, so here I am at a place in my work where my thread is running out. You never want to work to where you don't have any thread left to work with. Here I have about 3 to 4 inches left of thread to work with, and I'm going to work my thread back down into the work that I've been working on, the beadwork. So I'm going down into the beadwork, 3 to 4 rows, and then I'm going to try to find two beads that I'm going to loop around. So here I am, I'm 3 rows down, and I have 2 beads next door to each other. I've gone down through one, and I'm going to come up through the neighboring bead. So we're basically looping around these 2 beads to create tension so the work won't come undone. So I'm going back down through that bead, and I want to make 2 loops around these 2 beads. And then I'm coming back up through this bead. And now down one more time. And then after that, I'm simply going to work the needle back down into my beadwork until I find a comfortable place where I am ready to clip the work. I mean, sometimes this will just be 2 rows down. Sometimes I'll go a bit further. You want to just find the place that feels comfortable for you. It's important that you never try to force your needle through a bead. If it feels tough to get it through, then choose another bead, because these beads can break with enough pressure because they're glass, and you do not want that to happen. So now I clip my thread and I'm ready to start a new one. Ended the old thread and cut it off, and now I've cut a new piece of thread and thread my needle. I'm going to start 3 to 4 rows down from the outer edge and pull my needle through, and I'm basically going to anchor this piece of thread by looping around 2 beads, just as we did to end the last beads. So I'm going to anchor it by creating tension around these 2 beads. So we go up one, down the other, these 2 neighboring beads, and then up the first one again, down the other, pull that tight, and then up once more. So you have 2 complete loops. Give it a good tug, make sure it's not going anywhere. And then I'm going to work my needle up the beadwork to end up on that outside edge bead so I can continue to work my brick stitch rows across just as I had been before. So 1 bead at a time, don't rush it. And now I am to that outside edge bead. And once I get my needle through, I can start a row of brick stitch just like I would have before. Okay, so here we are. I finished my pyramid and I'm ready to add a thread guard. So I pick up my thread guard, I thread my needle through the little hole at the bottom of the thread guard, pull it down to the piece, and then I'm going to bring my needle down through the other hole in the thread guard, and then also through the outside bead in my work. So right there, pull that down, and now you have the thread guard sitting in place, but we want to really secure that, so we're going to do it again. So I'm going to work my needle down through the beadwork to find a path to come up through the first hole in the thread guard again. So I'm going through this gold bead here. I've had a little knot, or a little hang up. I've unhooked that, and now I'm going to come back up towards the thread guard. Working 1 bead at a time. You want to go slowly here. And then now I've made my way back up through to the thread guard. So I come through that bead, through the thread guard, And then I'm going to go down through the other side of the thread guard. And the main thing here is to make sure when you pull your thread tight that the thread stays inside that little channel of the thread guard. You don't want it to come loose. That's a pretty common thing. So go slowly here, make sure it stays in that channel. You can see here it's right inside of there. You don't want it to be loose. And now I'm simply going to work this thread back into the piece and then anchor my thread by finding 2 beads again to loop around. We've done this already. And once I've done that, I will create some tension, clip the thread, and then I'm ready to move on to the bottom part of the earring where the looped fringe is. So when you get to that part, join me back here, and then we will prepare our thread to add on the looped fringe. Okay, so here we are. We've finished our top part of our earring, and now you need to cut your nylon thread. It's important that you stretch the nylon thread out. That's what I'm doing here. It does have a bit of stretch, you'll feel in it, and you want to get rid of that stretch so you don't end up having your work stretch later. So stretch it out, thread your needle, and then you're going to start towards the edge of your work and anchor that thread just as we did when we started a new thread in the other part of the work. So you find your 2 beads next door to each other, loop around them 2 times, anchor that, and then come to the outside edge of your work on that first row of ladder stitch, and that's where we're going to start our fringe. Okay, so we have our thread in position to add the looped fringe. So the first thing we're going to do is add the beads. This is a lot of beads. I think it's about 45 beads for this outside loop, something like that, which is pretty boring. You don't want to watch me add all of those beads. So we are going to skip ahead here to the point where I have all of those beads. Here we are. I have all of the beads, and then I'm going to take my needle and come through the opposite outside edge of ladder stitch. I come up through there like so, and then I'm going to bring my needle down through the neighboring bead in the ladder stitch like this. I pull that snugly, and then I add the next row of beaded fringe. So again, I'm counting out all of those beads in my pattern, which is pretty boring. So here we are. I'm actually on the 3rd row now. Just show you again. So you're basically just coming up through the 3rd bead from the outside there. and then you come down through the neighboring bead. And obviously you did the same thing for the row 2, you came up through the second bead. So you just keep carrying on like this until you get to the 5th row, which is here we are on the 5th row of fringe. And I'm going to bring my needle up through the 5th bead from the outside of the opposite edge. But this time, instead of coming back down through the row of ladder stitch, I am going to bring my needle back up into the work, weave it in several rows, and then find 2 neighboring beads where I'm going to anchor it just like we've done so many times before. But this time when I anchor it, we're done, which is so exciting. So keep working up. And now I found my 2 beads. I'm going to loop around and create my tension to finish off this earring. And once I've done that, I will clip all the threads. If you have little edges that are sort of left over in any part of your work, you could take a lighter and just like simply like run it really quickly over the thread, and that will melt the thread down to your work. The key there is to do it very, very quickly. I would show you that, but I don't have a lighter here right now. I'll probably do that at a later date. But here we are. I could clip that and we're ready to go. And we are finished with this earring. I hope you are super proud of yourself. You did this. You have the second one to go, but you can totally do this now. You've got this. And if you enjoyed this video, I hope you will subscribe and do more beading tutorials with me. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.